بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وبعد. To continue inshallah with the muhaddab من إحياء علوم الدين of the great Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, and we reached الفصل الثالث في أسرار الزكاة في القابض وأسباب استحقاقه. He is going to talk about now the al-qabid, so the one who receives the zakah. And so we spoke about the wada'if al-mu'ti, the one who gives some things that he has to take into consideration. And so now we're going to talk about the one who receives and the reasons that legitimize his receival of zakah. So basically, to begin, who is permitted to take zakah? So he says, asnaful mustahiqeen, the categories of those who are allowed to take zakah. He says, اعلم أنه لا يستحق الزكاة إلا حر مسلم ليس بهاشمي ولا مطلب. So the first thing is that the person who takes zakah has to be hur, so a free Muslim. Likewise, they cannot be basically from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, as they are not allowed to take zakah. And previously, there would be something else which would be given to the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ. Although there is a fatwa which is often used if a person is from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ and they are impoverished, they do not have any means of provision and so on and so forth, that in a time where that which is usually given to them, i.e. it's a stipend that's given from Baytul Mal, when it's not available, we don't have Baytul Mal today, it's permissible for them to take the zakah. So then he says, اتصف بصفة من صفات الأصناف الثمانية المذكورين في كتاب الله عز وجل ولا تصرف زكاة إلى كافر. So he says, and they have to have one of the attributes of the 8 categories mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in regards to those who receive zakah. And then he says it's not allowed to give zakah to a non-Muslim. But in saying that, remember, if you know a person who's from Banu Hashim, he's from the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, or he or she is a non-Muslim, and you want to give charity, you can give voluntary charity, a sadaqah. As for zakah, it has to be based upon these conditions. He says, أما الصبي والمجنون فيجوز الصرف إليهما إذا قبض وليهما. So as for the sabi, the child, and the person who has lost their sanity, it's permissible to give them zakah if their guardian takes the zakah on their behalf. So for example, you have a young child who has not yet reached the age of puberty, or even then ar-rushd. They're not yet able to take care of their own financial situation. This person, you cannot give the money directly to them. It has to be given to their guardian, the one who's going to spend on their behalf in a way which is befitting, etc. Why? Because they might take the money and do something silly with it. Likewise, a person who has lost their sanity. Then he says, فَلْنَذْكُرْ أَصْنَافَ الثَّمَانِيَةِ. So we're going to mention the 8 categories. Number 1, الصنف الأول الفقراء. So usually we translate al-fuqara as the impoverished, the poor, etc. But there are 2 categories which are very similar, and there's a slight difference between the 2. And so we want to understand the difference between the 2. And so we're not going to translate the term. We're going to call this person a faqir. And faqr literally is poverty, and the second we'll see inshallah al-miskin or al-masakin. So he says al-fuqara wal-faqiru huwa alladhi laysa lahu mal ولا قدرة له على الكسب فإن كان معه قوت يومه وكسوة حاله فليس بفقير ولكنه مسكين وإن كان معه نصف قوت يومه فهو فقير. So he says the faqir is the one who has no wealth and he is unable to earn for himself. ليس له قدرة على الكسب, so he's unable to earn. فَإِنْ كَانَ مَعَهُ قُوتُ يَوْمِهِ, if he has that which will suffice him for the day, i.e. of food, وَكِسْوَةُ حَالِهِ, and that which he can clothe himself with, i.e. that which is sufficient for his current circumstance, the time he finds himself in, فَلَيْسَ بِفَقِيرٍ. This person is not a faqir. He's not a person who is to be considered impoverished. What is he then? He says, وَلَكِنَّهُ مِسْكِينٌ. He is a miskeen person. And so the faqir is the one who does not have any wealth, but he is unable to earn, and he does not have the food that he can eat for the day, or that which will suffice him of clothing for his particular time, the circumstance he finds himself in. That person is faqir. As for the miskeen, he is the one, وَإِنْ كَانَ مَعَهُ نِصْفُ قُوتِ يَوْمِهِ فَهُوَ فَقِيرٌ. The miskeen is the one who has that which will suffice him of the day, i.e. food for the day. And he has that which will suffice him of clothing, etc. He says, وَإِنْ كَانَ مَعَهُ نِصْفُ قُوتِ يَوْمِهِ فَهُوَ فَقِيرٌ. If he has half of what he will suffice him for the day, then he can be considered a faqir. So the faqir is the one who has half or less of that which will suffice him for the day, and the miskeen is the one who has that which will suffice him for the day and perhaps a little bit more. What though does it mean? قُوتَ يَوْمِهِ. That's the question. So when we say that which will suffice him of food, of nourishment for the day, what does that mean? And that goes back to the context, and to the time, and so on and so forth. Then he said, and again, Allahu A'lam, perhaps we live in an extreme time. The idea that we have to eat 3 times a day, Allahu A'lam if that's the case, i.e. that which will suffice you. Eating 3 times a day, it's not necessary to suffice your body of nourishment and so on and so forth, especially with the lifestyles that we live. Perhaps someone that lives a very active lifestyle, it's different. But generally, we don't live very active lifestyles in comparison to generations that came before us. And much of our eating is not based upon needs, but it's based upon wants. A lot of our eating comes from desire rather than need. And we use this term very loosely. I need some food. I need some water. I need a cup of coffee. I need a tea. I need this. Reality is, it is I want, I desire, I would like. So then he says, وَلَا يُخْرِجُهُ عَنِ الْفَقْرِ كَوْنُهُ مُعْتَادًا لِلسُّؤَالِ فَلَا يُجْعَلُ السُّؤَالُ كَسْبًا. He says, if this faqir, this individual who has no food for the day and so on and so forth, if he is someone who usually asks, he's asking people, that does not change the fact that he is a faqir. I.e. begging or asking should not be considered kasb, a means of earning. Even if he asks, he's still faqir. بخلاف ما لو قدر على كسب فإن ذلك يخرجه عن الفقر. Contrary to this is if the person is able to earn. He's able to earn. He has the capacity to earn, but he refuses to do so, or he's just not using that which Allah has given him. So he has the strength, he has the mental capacity, he has the ability, but he's not doing so, then this person is not a faqir. This person is not a faqir. فإن ذلك يخرجه عن الفقر فإن قدر على الكسب بآلة فهو فقير ويجوز أن يشترى له آلة. If the only way he's able to earn is with a particular tool, and he doesn't have the means to buy that tool, then he can once again be considered a faqir, and that particular tool can be purchased for him. What does that mean in our time today? Allahu A'lam. Because today we live in a time where you don't necessarily have to be skilled to earn a job. You can, or to earn an income. There are many unskilled professions, i.e. you can start off working in a shop. You can start off as an unskilled person and you're trained up, and so on and so forth. And we live in a time, in a particular area perhaps, which is a lot different from other parts of the world. In other parts of the world, if you do not have a career, you don't have that which you can offer, a service, a skill, then it's very difficult to get into something. And this is something that we take for granted, especially young brothers and young sisters. They take for granted this fact in the UK and in Europe perhaps, that you have so many options available to you. So many options. You can go to college, you can go to university, you can train up in so many different fields, so many different areas. If you choose a niche market, you can train yourself up in that market, and oftentimes for free. if you're under a certain age. And even as adults, there are opportunities to train up and to learn and to get into careers for free, sometimes even paid for. This isn't available in other parts of the world. And it doesn't matter what color you are, what ethnicity you are, what tribe you are, no, it's available to anyone who has a citizenship or has a right to remain, and so on and so forth. And that's a ni'mah, and we should be grateful for that. And it's very sad to see a young generation who are not taking advantage of the resources that are available, when if those resources were available to others who live in true poverty, they would jump at the chance to take up those opportunities. Then he says, and listen to this, very important, وَإِن كَانَ مُتَعَبِّدًا يَمْنَعَهُ الْكَسْبُ مِنْ وَظَائِفِ الْعِبَادَاتِ فَلْيَكْتَسِبْ لِأَنَّ الْكَسْبَ أَوْلَى مِنْ ذَلِكَ. He says, if this person is a muta'abbid, who's a muta'abbid? Someone who spends his days and nights in ibadah. He's dedicated himself to ibadah, to worship, i.e. ritualized worship. Salah, siyam, qira'ah, dhikr, so on and so forth. He says, and that would be prevented if he were to go out to earn. So he doesn't want to earn. Why? Because he wants to dedicate himself to worship. What does Imam Ghazali say? He says, فَلْيَكْتَسِبْ لِأَنَّ الْكَسْبَ أَوْلَى مِنْ ذَلِكَ. He should go out and earn for himself. Why? Because earning for yourself comes before voluntary acts of worship, especially if you have responsibility, if you have a family, etc. And it's very unfortunate to see that. This is an issue we have today, where you have individuals who they don't want to earn, or they want to collect money or earn money without doing anything, simply because they have dedicated themselves to an act of worship, such as seeking knowledge, for example. Seeking knowledge does not mean that you should not earn for yourself. In the beginning of your talab, if you have a scholarship, yes, fine, alhamdulillah. But you should not be putting your hand out and asking people to fund you whilst you are on your journey seeking knowledge, as it contradicts the framework of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ taught us that independence, financial independence, is something which is praiseworthy, especially for a man. Therefore, you should not be out there asking and getting other people to ask for you whilst you are studying. No, that's not the way it works. If there is a fund available and you apply for the fund and it's given, why? Because as a community, we want to fulfill that obligation upon us. Alhamdulillah, that's a ni'mah. But as for a person putting themselves out there and at-ta'akkul bil-Qur'an, where a person earns their income through the Qur'an, by reciting the Qur'an in big gatherings, and so what happens? It leads to a disrespect and a disregard and a debasing of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People lose respect for the Qur'an. People lose respect for knowledge. People lose respect for the Qari. And this is something which a person who has been adorned with knowledge, or has been attributed to the people of knowledge, i.e. they have access to the books and to the ulama, they should not put themselves in that position. Because you are lowering the status of Islam by lowering yourself. Then he says, as-sinfu thani al-masakin. So he talks about now the masakin, the second category. وَالْمَسْكِينُ هُوَ الَّذِي لَا يَفِيَ دَخْلُهُ بِخَرْجِ فَقَدْ يَمْلِكُ أَلْفَ دِرْهَمٍ وَهُوَ مِسْكِينٌ وَقَدْ لَا يَمْلِكُ إِلَّا فَأْسًا وَحَبْلًا وَهُوَ غَنِيٌّ. He says the miskin is the person who basically his income is not sufficient for his outgoings. That which he earns is not enough in relation to that which he spends. But we're not talking about someone who spends lavishly and then says, I'm a miskin. No, someone who cannot make ends meet, cannot provide for his family, cannot fulfill his responsibilities that are upon him from the perspective of the Sharia. And he's working, he's trying to earn. This person is miskin. And he says, for that reason, you might find someone who owns 1,000 dirham, but this person is considered to be a miskin. Why? Because it's not sufficient for that which he has of responsibility upon his shoulders. But yet you find another man who has an axe and a rope, and this person is considered to be wealthy. Why? Because he has what suffices him of asking other people. He's not in need of help from other people. He can use his tool to earn for himself an income which is sufficient for that which he needs to spend. So this person is ghani. And real ghina, real wealth, is not the wealth that you have in your bank account. It's the wealth of independence, the wealth of the heart. not needing other people, not being dependent upon other people. And that's true wealth. And sometimes true wealth also means not being dependent upon things. If you are in need of a luxury lifestyle, you're not wealthy. You're enslaved to that lifestyle. You're dependent upon that lifestyle. You have to feed that lifestyle. Whereas when you cut yourself off from this dunya, that's true wealth, because you're no longer in need anymore. You don't need anything other than a small amount to suffice you on your journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's true wealth. Then he says, وَلَا يُخْرِجُهُ عَنِ الْمَسْكَنَةِ الدويرة التي يسكنها والثوب الذي يستره وأثاث البيت مما يليق به. And if a person owns a small house, a duwayrah, so a very small dar, and he owns clothing which is sufficient to cover his awrah and looks, presentable in accordance to the norms of society that he lives in, and he owns furniture in his house, that does not mean that this person is not a miskeen. He can own those things and still be miskeen, i.e. he still has a right to zakah. Why? Because those are essential items. Those are essential items, necessary items. Likewise, he says, وَكَذَا الْكُتُبِ وَكَذَا الْكُتُبِ. Likewise, books. So a person might see someone has 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pounds worth of books, and they say this person is not miskeen. No, the books are necessary for this person, especially if he's a student of knowledge. If he's a student of knowledge, the Islamic sciences, or if he is a professional in a particular career and he needs these books. He needs these books for his study, for his career, for his whatever it is that, reference books and so on and so forth. Books in the Islamic framework are considered essential. Why? Because Islam promotes intellectualism, soundness of mind, development, and so books are considered as essential as the furniture and so on and so forth. Perhaps even to some more essential. Because if you're a student of knowledge, you can sleep on the floor, but you can't study without a book. So they're considered to be more essential depending on the circumstance. Then he says, الصنف الثالث العاملون. The عاملون from the word عامل, i.e. العاملون عليها, those who are working in the arena of zakah. He says, وَهُمَ السُّعَاةُ الَّذِينَ يَجْمَعُونَ الزَّكَوَاتِ. They are the ones who are going out to collect the zakawat, collect the different types of zakah. So likewise, we can extend that to those who work in the institutions that are collecting zakah. And sometimes we don't like to see the statement that 5% of the zakah, or not the zakah, 5% of the sadaqah goes to the charity organization, or when it says 95% goes straight to charity. If we don't give 5% of the charity to those who are collecting it and those who are going out to distribute it, we won't have anyone to collect it and distribute it. We want to give charity to those who are impoverished in poor countries. Who's going to go out there and give it to the impoverished people? Who's going to oversee those projects? We need to employ people to do that. And so as long as the employment is just and fair, we're not talking about a CEO taking £100,000 a year for himself. No, we're not talking about paying a da'i £80,000 per year for the sake of giving a few lectures. No, that's something else. We're talking about those who are actually working in the zakat industry, in the sadaqah industry. That's their job. That's their industry. They are working 9 to 5 to oversee, to regulate, to answer any queries, involved in the industry in its totality and whatever that requires, perhaps media, perhaps designing, perhaps education, etc. Those individuals, if we do not give them from the charity they collect, where are we going to get them from? And so if an organization is giving a percentage of its charity to the members of the organization, there's no problem in that as long as it is a fair and just amount. And they're transparent with that as well. The issue is when they start to spend zakah in ways which, or they start to spend the sadaqah in ways which they have not been transparent about. This is where the issue lies. Or when CEOs are taking bonuses, when CEOs are taking extreme amounts of money, this is where the problem lies. And it goes back to at-taqwa. You're eating the money of the people. This is the money of the people. Their hard-earned money that they want to give in charity for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're putting that into your bank account. And of course it's haram. Then he says, سوى الخليفة والقاضي ولا يزاد واحد منهم عن أجرة المثل. So the Khalifa and the Qadi, so the Khalifa, i.e. Al-Imam Al-A'zam, and the Qadi, they're not to take any money from the Zakat, even if they're involved in collecting it and processing it, etc. Why? Because they have their own stipend that comes from Baytul Mal. The Khalifa has an amount that he is to be given from Baytul Mal. Likewise, the Qadi has an amount which he is to be given from Baytul Mal. The Qadi being the judge and the Khalifa being the leader of the Muslim state. They have their own stipend, their own salary. And the salary of the Qadi and the Khalifa should be substantial. Why? To protect them from corruption. The judge should be paid enough that puts him in a position where he is not in need of anything, so that he is not prone to corruption. And a person may say, but he should have taqwa. Corruption shouldn't be an issue. Yes, ideally. But when you are putting procedures in place, protocol in place, laws in place, you don't go by the ideals, you go by the standards. And so if there is a possibility that someone can fall victim to corruption, you put something in place to protect the system from the corruption. And that is by giving them a substantial amount. And of course, they have to earn it as well with their work, with their qualifications, etc. And this issue here, the issue of al-qudat and the earning and how much they were earning, etc., is one of the issues which led to corruption of seeking knowledge generations ago. Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala speaks about himself in this particular book. Then he says, وَلَا يَزَادُ وَاحِدٌ مِّنْهُمْ عَنْ أُجْرَةُ الْمِثِلِ. And one of these individuals, i.e. the person who's working in collecting the zakat, should not be given more than the average salary of that particular region, day, industry, and so on and so forth. Ujratul Mithal basically means the amount which is considered to be the standard salary. So for example, perhaps in London, it would be, what do they call it? The living wage. The living wage, for example. They're able to live, they don't have to go and get a second job, and they're able to suffice on that one income. That's reasonable and that's fair, as long as they're doing full-time work. So the person should not take any more than that. Then he says, الصنف الرابع المؤلفة قلوبهم على الإسلام. So the fourth category, i.e. of those who are legitimately allowed to receive zakah, those who the Muslims are trying to soften their hearts towards or upon Islam. He says, وهم الأشراف الذين أسلموا وهم مطاعون في قومهم. And they are basically the elite members of their societies that have become Muslim, and they are followed within their communities. They are followed within their communities, i.e. they have a substantial say and position in their communities. So these individuals, if they become Muslim, we are allowed to give them from the zakah. Why? He says, وَفِي إِعْطَائِهِمْ تَقْرِيرُهُمْ عَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ. Because in giving to them, you are keeping them firm upon Islam. وَتَرْغِيبُ نَظَائِرِهِمْ وَأَتْبَاعِهِمْ. And you are encouraging their peers and those who follow them to become Muslim. And so this is political. And this is also something which we have to consider. And if you read history, you will understand this point, that we're talking, the deen is ikhlas, without a shadow of a doubt. But there is an aspect of deen which is also what? Siyasa, political. Because the deen is a law and it's a framework of law. And so when you have a framework of law, when you are operating as a state, you need to think politically as well as spiritually. And so a person might say, but this is a lack of ikhlas and you're giving them money, what is this, bribing, etc. No, this is political. It's an incentive. And it's a reality, and it's something that if we were to apply today would bring about a lot of benefit. Then he says, الصنف الخامس المكاتبون. So the fifth category of those who are legally allowed to take zakah, المكاتبون. He says, فيدفع إلى السيد سهم المكاتب وإن دفع إلى المكاتب جاز. Who is the mukatab? The mukatab is the person who is enslaved and has entered into a contract with his or her master in order to buy their freedom. And so within the framework of Islam, one of the ways that the freedom of those enslaved was encouraged was this particular process, where a person who has been enslaved previously or they were born in slavery can legally buy their freedom from their master. So they have to pay their master the price that they would be worth in the market, and the Islamic State would help them in doing so by giving them zakat. So they can go to the master and give the master the full amount, and the slave is then considered a free person. So if, for example, alhamdulillah, today slavery doesn't exist the way it used to. There are different types of slavery, which we're not going to go into now. But if we had a Baytul Mal, we can use that mal to free those who are enslaved by buying them out from the slavery that they found themselves in with those who own them. Then he says, الصنف السادس الغارمون والغارم هو الذي استقرض في طاعة أو مباح وهو فقير فإن استقرض في معصية فلا يعطى إلا إذا تاب. He says the sixth category الغارمون, so those who are indebted. والغارم هو الذي استقرض في طاعة, but not any person who is indebted. There are conditions. Number one, he has a debt due to ta'ah. Let's say, for example, he took out a debt to fulfill something that he had to fulfill on behalf of Islam. Or fi mubah, something which is permissible. He took out a loan to buy a car. وهو فقير, and he is impoverished, he is poor. فإن استقرض في معصية, if a person takes out a debt, a loan, so that he can engage in something which is haram, فلا يعطى. This person is not allowed to be given from zakah. إلا إذا تاب, except if he has repented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that particular act. Then he says, وَإِن كَانَ غَنِيًّا لَمْ يَقْضِ دَيْنَهُ. If he is a wealthy person and he took out a loan, his loan is not allowed to be paid back from zakah, إِلَّا إِذَا كَانَ قَدْ اسْتَقْرَضَ لِمَصْلَحَةٍ أَوْ إِطْفَاءِ فِتْنَةٍ. Except if he has taken out a loan to rectify between two arguing parties or to put out a societal fitna. So let's say, for example, there were two tribes and a big argument ensued, and a person tried to mediate between the two tribes, and he said, if compensation is given, £250,000, will that suffice the situation? Will it end this particular issue? And they say yes. He goes, he takes out a loan and he puts the £250,000 down. It hasn't come from that side, nor has it come from that side, but it's ended a potential issue that could have become a societal fitna. In that case, even if this person is wealthy, he has the right to take that loan back from zakah. Why? Because he's doing a service for the state of Islam. Likewise, for example, let's say two warring gangs, if you were to contextualize it, and someone took out a loan to stop bloodshed and said, look, compensation, this is 10,000 for you, here's 5,000 for you, end the issue. And they both sides agree, that person technically can go, if they were Muslims and so on and so forth, can go and explain the situation, and of course they will investigate, and they have the right to take that money back if they are wealthy. If they are poor, then they have the right to take it back anyway, if it was in ta'ah or mubah and so on and so forth. But again, there are conditions. It's not where a person says, okay, you know what, I want to buy a Porsche, goes and buys a Porsche with a loan and goes and takes the money back from zakat. No, of course not. We're not paying back extravagance. Then he says, الصنف السابع الغزاة. So those who are fighting in the path of Allah, الذين ليس لهم مرسوم في ديوان المرتزقة. So those who are fighting in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have joined the Muslim army, but they are not officially registered as those who are going to receive a stipend from the government. So those individuals, they can be given from zakah that which will suffice them for their time in the Muslim army. And some, they use the fi sabilillah today as fi sabilillah, for example, building masajid and so on and so forth. There is an opinion that allows for that, a contemporary opinion, but the classical or the safer opinion is that it should be spent in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specified. Why? Because fi sabilillah in the Quran usually refers to al-jihad fi sabilillah, nothing else, generally speaking. Then he says الصنف الثامن ابن السبيل وهو الذي شخص من بلده ليسافر في غير معصية فيعطى إن كان فقيرا وإن كان له مال ببلد آخر أعطي بقدر بلغته. He says the eighth category is ابن السبيل. So the person who's basically a wayfarer, he's lost his way. And he is the one who's left his land to travel to another land in a journey which does not involve sin. So if a person has traveled for that which is mubah or for ta'ah and they lost their way, they're not able to pay to get back, then they can be given from zakat to return back to their country. Or if they have money, they have wealth in another country and it's closer than their home country, they can be given that which will suffice them to get to that country to take their wealth, to take their money. And this is something which many people unfortunately take advantage of in Hajj and Umrah. You'll have many individuals that come and they make up stories. And I've seen with my own eyes, someone came into a hotel, asked for money and gave us the story. And so everyone gave him a little bit of money. Step outside and the brother's driving around in a GMC. Literally, with my own eyes, I saw it. A lot of these people, unfortunately, they have no fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if you want to give sadaqah, you have to be careful who you give your sadaqah to. Yes, you will be rewarded for it. But those individuals, tell them there are places you can go to officially in Hajj and Umrah, etc. Places for zakah, places for sadaqah. Direct them to those places. Don't give your money to these people. Because a lot of them are con artists. And for us, we have to be careful. We don't just give our wealth away, give our money away. Then he moves on to وظائف القابض. So the considerations for the person who's taking the zakah. What considerations does he have to have? Does she have to have? And we'll stop there inshallah so we can take them all together بإذن الله next week.